Have you ever heard the word underrated before? You probably don't hear it a lot, but you're probably familiar with it anyway. And in fact, you've probably heard the opposite word, overrated, a lot more. Like, let's say there's all kinds of hype surrounding like a song or a movie or a TV show. And then you check it out for yourself and you're like, meh. In other words, overrated. But what about the things that are underrated? You know, like the things that don't get the hype that they deserve. The best example of this, in my humble opinion, is the Chicken Chalupa Supreme from Taco Bell. That thing deserves its own holiday. Like, if you've never had one, then you don't know what you're missing. You'll be like, yep, this thing is underrated. Chances are there are plenty of things we consider underrated. Sports teams, celebrities, shoes, bands, restaurants. But have you ever had that feeling as a teenager that like you are underrated? Maybe you feel underrated by your parents. Like you feel like they think about you like you're some kind of little kid. Or you feel underrated by teachers or coaches. Like they talk about you like you're not responsible enough to make your own decisions. Maybe you feel underrated by society. It's like every study or stat reveals how terrible teenagers have become. I mean, isn't it annoying that when people talk about teenagers, they talk about them like they're dumb or lazy or selfish or immature? Am I right? Or am I right? It's like, hey adults, I'm standing right here. I can actually hear what you're saying, and I'm smart enough to get what you're saying. This feeling of being underrated can even translate to our faith and how or what we believe. And trust me, folks, this one is complicated. Maybe you feel underrated in your faith because faith isn't a big deal to you. It seems really far off, like it's one of those things that you'll get to later when you grow up. Maybe you want to take faith seriously, but it feels like all you ever hear about is what you're doing wrong. And you feel underrated because you're not doing everything right. For a lot of you, faith is something that hinges on someone else, like your parents or your grandparents, your small group leader, or maybe even your youth pastor. The only reason faith is a part of your life is because someone brought you to church, made you sit in the front row, and is constantly telling you to read your Bible. Some of you don't take faith all that seriously because the adults in your life have made you feel underrated. So you're like, what's the point? Like if they don't think you have what it takes, then why should you try to prove them otherwise? There's a verse in the New Testament that talks all about young people and their faith. It was written by the Apostle Paul, who was the most legendary missionary in the history of Christianity. And he wrote a letter to a guy named Timothy, who was young. So my assumption is that Paul would talk about things like how irresponsible young people are and a bunch of things that young people need to do better. But instead, Paul wrote this: don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Wait, what? Is this verse really telling young people to set an example for older people? A group of people who treats teenagers like they're underrated. More than that, wouldn't it be awkward to think about setting an example for people who think that you need to like grow up and act better and take on more responsibility? I mean, no older person would look at a teenager and think, wow, thank you for setting a good example for me. Would they? I mean, plus, what would setting an example even look like when it comes to your faith? Back to Paul. He was a key leader in the first generation of Christians. He wrote over half the New Testament and traveled thousands of miles around the Mediterranean, spreading the word of Jesus. He also mentored young leaders of the faith like Timothy. Paul saw something genuine and authentic in Timothy's faith. And as a result, he put a lot of trust in Timothy. Paul respected him a lot. So when Paul tells him not to let people look down on him because he was young, this is more of a friend-to-friend pep talk from a loyal supporter. If you ever feel like you're underrated, then maybe you can relate to Timothy. In his line of work at his age, he likely got treated with less respect and credibility. They were probably like, where's Paul? What does he think we should do? What is he telling you in his letters? Aren't you like his sidekick or something? And Paul's like, don't let people do that to you. I know you. I see something more in you than the people around you do. Now, if we fast forward a little bit, Paul takes an interesting turn and talks about Timothy's family and their faith. I'm reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I'm persuaded now lives in you also. Notice that first, Paul recognized and acknowledged Timothy's sincere faith. Second, even though Timothy came from a family that believed and set a positive and healthy example of what mature faith looked like, they both knew that Timothy couldn't count on the faith of his mom or his grandmother to be enough for him. In order to be taken seriously and to not be underrated, Timothy had to make some personal choices for himself and for his faith. The same is true for you. In fact, you can think of it this way: only you can own your faith. Even if your family doesn't have faith, you get to own your story. Actually, in some ways, it's easier for you. You don't have to figure out where their faith ends and yours begins. It's all yours. Don't let the absence of faith in your family decide that your faith has to be underrated. You get to determine your own faith. No matter where you come from, no matter how old you are, you can choose to own a faith of your very own. It's not about what your parents want, your small group leader wants, or even what everybody else is doing. It's about you. This is about your life and your faith. It's about choosing a faith of your own. In fact, instead of focusing on how underrated you are, just focus on owning your own faith. Set an example when it comes to living out your faith, and let everything take care of itself after that. Now, I understand what you may be thinking. Timothy was a faith rock star who was friends with one of the biggest Christian celebrities in all of history, and that's not me. I'm not Timothy, and Paul is definitely not my small group leader. So what hope do you have, and do I have, for creating a personal faith that moves from underrated to, at the very least, decent? Well, let's start with where you are. You don't have to be Paul, and you don't have to be Timothy. You get to be you. And you get to decide what a faith that isn't underrated looks like in your own life. So where do we start? First, pick a part of your faith to own. Pick an area of your own faith that you need to own. Your faith will determine a majority of the decisions that you make in your life. It's not just in how we interact with God, but also in how we treat friends, parents, and people that we struggle to like. It factors in how we treat others. So when it comes to picking a part of your faith to own or really focus on, it's bigger than just what happens at church. Maybe you've made a habit out of a behavior that you know isn't good for you, like partying or drinking. Maybe there's a decision that you're making or a relationship that you're in that's getting you in trouble, or it's bringing you further from doing what's right and what's good for you. It may be time for you to own your faith by getting out of that relationship, not posting certain things, or avoiding the temptation to use substances that can hurt you. Once you start owning parts of your faith and you begin to see its positive impact, you'll be encouraged to own other parts of your faith as well. Because the more of your faith you own, the more empowered you'll be. And you'll be in more control of the choices and the life that you live. And before you know it, you'll realize making good choices happens more and more naturally. The things that you watch, the music that you listen to, even the people that you hang out with, and may start to look different because owning your faith empowers you. Second, don't underrate your faith. With a lot of these small changes, you may not see immediate, huge change. The payoff may not be immediate, but don't underrate what God is doing in the process. One of my favorite questions to ask myself in moments like these is one that my dad used to ask me: how do you eat an elephant? The answer? One bite at a time. And maybe this seems like a strange question because who actually eats elephants, right? But the elephant wasn't the point. The point was that you can conquer anything if you just take it day by day. Big change is a result of the small decisions that you make each and every day. So, you may wake up each morning and feel exactly the same as you did before, but you better believe that when you're living real faith and real changes are happening little by little, even if you can't see it. Now, third thing, don't let people look down on you. Owning your faith may not be the most popular thing to do in your peer group. People may look down on you for backing away from certain friendships, or not posting certain things on your phone, or not taking that drink. It's difficult to stay focused on doing what may not be popular. You may find yourself asking things like, well, what if I lose my friends? What if people talk negatively about me? Is personal faith really worth my status at school? Are people gonna think that I'm weird? Those are normal and understandable questions. But in those moments, it's important to remember to stay focused on the long-term goal of who you ultimately want to be. Remember who God is and how He's looking out for you, and He wants what's best for you. He wants to lead you into a faith that's anything but underrated. But you're the only one who can decide what your faith is going to look like. Just as no one else can give you faith, no one else should be able to take it away either. Staying focused and not allowing other people to negatively impact you is going to be so important as you begin to continue to own your faith. Now, as you head out this week, I want you to remember that only you can own your faith. It doesn't matter if there are 10 adults in your life who are pushing you towards a relationship with God. And it doesn't matter if there are none at all. It doesn't matter what the people around you are doing or what they approve of. The truth is, there's an opportunity for every single one of us to pursue an authentic faith of our very own. A faith that is real and genuine and not fake. A faith that can stand strong no matter what people say and think. A faith that doesn't fail because of your age. And just like Paul wrote to Timothy and reminded him that he had the same faith that his grandmother and mother had, the same is true for you. No matter how young you are or how underrated you may feel, there's a faith that's available for you. But only you can own your faith.